evening and welcome to another exciting show. Well, we've got a great lineup tonight, and it's okay, I'm not on my own. We've got two other guests, but we've got a bit of trouble with our bandwidth. No, it's not something embarrassing, it's the internet. So only one of us can actually be on at any given time to save on bandwidth. So two guests tonight are Gloria Moss, or Professor Gloria Moss PhD, who will be talking about the Great Fire of London fraud, and our regular guest John Hamer. Now, Gloria's got a very bad internet connection and keeps dropping in and out of the show. So John and I might have to wing it a bit if Gloria drops out. But first of all, I've got a few call outs to do. I went along to a stand in the park the other week. I don't know if you've heard of these stand in the parks. They're rather interesting. They started in Australia, but I didn't go all the way to Australia because I can't leave the country because we live in a prison country at the moment. But I went to one called, where are we? And it's on Telegram. Now, I've gone over to Telegram, and this is my address on Telegram. Telegram, Fockham Hall Radio. So if you want to say hello on Telegram, which is a lot better than Facebook, I can tell you, and you can say a little bit more. You can't, you're not really censored on there. But I went to the Telegram, they're on Telegram. They went to, it's stand in the park, space, and then hyphen, and then space, and then Hoddesdon. And there's another one which is at Cheshunt, which I believe is at Cedar Park in Cheshunt, and that's every Sunday at 10 o'clock, and it's very interesting. And I'll be going along to either one of those two, and I can say, you can say hello to me. Now tonight we're going to talk about, well, correction, our guests are going to talk about the Great Fire of London, 1666. And it's been imprinted into our minds that it was started by accident in Pudding Lane, and up to very recently, I sort of believed it. And I actually used to walk past the monument every morning because I used to work very nearby. I hasten to add, although I worked in the city, I was not in banking with a B or anything like that. I was in architecture, and I was working on site at the time at the Billingsgate redevelopment. And I remember walking past the monument every morning, and on the roof of the redevelopment, you could look down on the monument, which was very interesting. I wish I would have taken a picture of it. But I've worked close to many sites in London, but because I don't like London, I've never been up the monument, and I never went into the sites of London. So there it is. So anyway, without further ado, I'll welcome, I think Gloria's internet has gone down. So it's just me and John at the moment. So good evening, John. And I think might have to wing it about the Great Fire of London. And it started in Pudding Lane, didn't it? In a bakery. Over to you.
Well, hi, Chris. Hi, everyone. Nice to be here again on the regular Monday evening slot. First of all, I want to say about the Great Fire of London. I mean, this is going to be Gloria's show, by the way. She knows a heck of a lot more about it than I do. But I've got a kind of a separate theory on it, if you like, which I was going to outline before I'll hand it over to Gloria. But it looks like she's not here to hand it over to, so it could be a pretty long evening. First of all, I'd like to point out the fact that I don't believe in coincidences, and when you look at the year that the Great Fire of London took place, which was 1666, that immediately sets the alarm bells tingling. Now, it's a very long and complex story regarding the Great Fire of London, in my view, which dates back to the very early part of the 17th century, the 1630s, in fact, when a plot was hatched to usurp King Charles I by Oliver Cromwell and his cohorts. Now, the reason for that particular episode, shall we say, is not at all as we've told in the history books. But then again, what is? Nothing ever is it? But this one's a particularly interesting one because in the 1630s, something called the Bank of Amsterdam was formed. Now, the Bank of Amsterdam was the world's very first central bank. And of course, it was instigated by a group of people who shall remain nameless in order to protect Chris's YouTube channel. And there was a deal that took place between those people of a certain persuasion and Mr. Cromwell.
Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yes, the Jehovah's Witnesses, yeah. To actually, because what happened was that in the year 1290, the Jehovah's Witnesses had been expelled from England and they were not allowed to return. And up until that point in time, the 1630s, they hadn't been back into the country at all. So they saw an opportunity, and the opportunity was to begin something called the Bank of England, which we're all familiar with. Now, again, I'm sorry, this is a bit of a rambling story, but it is quite complicated, so please do bear with me. Now, Charles I would not, under any circumstances, sanction the Jehovah's Witnesses returning back into England. So, the Jehovah's Witnesses of Amsterdam, who ran the bank, came into negotiations with Oliver Cromwell and came up with a plot to get rid of Charles I, which, as we all know, this happened. It culminated in the Civil War and the execution of Charles I. But it was a much, much longer story than this. But sorry, I'm a bit brain fogged today. I've been ill. I was in bed most of last week. I'm still recovering, so please do excuse me while the cogs
get your thoughts together. And I'll have a look in chat whilst you get your thoughts together.
Please, yeah. Sorry,
Professor Moss. I don't know where she's gone. I think she's floating around somewhere, or internet connection's floating around somewhere in the universe. So we're winging it a little bit. John's got very good knowledge on this, but it's slightly different to Professor Moss's. So, and I've got an apology to make to Aunt Sally. Well, first of all, we've got where we got here? We've got Glaxion on, and he said my Fockham Hall site is down again. I think it's back up again. I don't know what's happening with that. And then we've got Aunt Sally. Hang on, I think something's going strange here again. For some unknown reason, they won't show on the screen. Oh, here we are. Good evening, peeps. I have prior engagement tonight, so I will have to watch this on catch up. We need a note from your parents, you know. But actually, Aunt Sally, I've got an apology to make. I found out today that on another platform, because I did try out Odyssey, you put some very, very nice comments on there, and I haven't answered them, and that was 2 months ago. So smack wrist. I'm terribly sorry. Please don't take it personally. A bit silly. And then we've got Sean. We've got look forward to this one, chaps. And I think Aunt Sally is stuck on there now. Come on you go. There's something wrong with this tonight. I don't know what's going on. I can't get rid of the having trouble connecting now. Okay, well, here we go. Can you still see Aunt Sally on there, John?
No, it's Sean Hamer now.
Well, you can see Sean Hamer. I can see Aunt Sally. So it's looking forward to this one, chaps. We've got New World Order, evening peeps. And we've got everybody saying good evening, everybody. And now we've got here more like started in a pudding. I like that one. Can you see that one on the screen?
Yes.
Now it says we've got here, weren't they still using tally sticks up until the Fire of London, or am I mixing my dates up? I wouldn't know.
Sean, they used tally sticks right up until quite until much later. Oh, now Chris has gone. Oh joy. Okay, so yeah, the tally sticks were actually being burned in the basement of the House of Parliament, House of Commons, Palace of Westminster, when it caught the whole place on fire, and it was the end of the tally sticks actually signalled at the end of the Palace of Westminster as well, because it burned down in the 1850s. Because somebody was trying to burn them in the basement, and the whole place caught fire and burned down. So I think that's what you're referring to, is it? But it is slightly different. So in the absence of Chris, I shall soldier on my own here, and I'll try and continue with the story a little bit. Oh, it's coming back now. No, he's gone again. This has turned into a very successful evening, isn't it? Never mind. Yeah, so the point was that they were the Jays, the certain people wanted to come back into the country to form the Bank of England, because they knew exactly how much money they were going to make from it. So they tried to negotiate with the King, Charles I. He wouldn't have any of it. So they went to Oliver Cromwell, who was a prominent member of Parliament at that time, and they plotted to actually come up with the English Civil War, to rid the country of King Charles, to pave the way for the Jehovah's Witnesses to come back into the country and start the Bank of England. Now, this is a very short version of this story. The longer version is in one of our books. I think it's in Falsification of History, but it could be Behind the Curtain. Anyway, so yeah, to cut a very long story short, the Bank of England was meant to obviously usurp the power to create money from the government, which obviously generates money for the people who do that, so that they yeah, thank you. So the point was that they wanted the Jays to get back into the country, and they couldn't do that while Charles was alive. So that resulted in the English Revolution, aka the Civil War, the execution of Charles I, all financed by the Jays of Amsterdam. Right, now, to clear the way for the Bank of England, which actually was instigated in the very early 1690s, so 20-some years after the Great Fire of London, they wanted to clear the city completely because they wanted to be a fresh new start. And this, I believe, is exactly why the Great Fire of London happened. And I think there are lots of other theories about it. There are lots of other conspiracy theories about it. There are some of it may be true. Some of it may be true. I don't know, because actually one guy was executed for it, whose name escapes me. I do apologise. It's not really my subject. But a French guy actually admitted to starting the fire, and he was tried and executed about 2 months afterwards. And then, of course, it was found out a short while after that he couldn't possibly be guilty because he wasn't even in the country at that time. Or he was in the country, but he'd never left his ship at that point in time when it all began. His ship was in the docks somewhere. So, yeah, that's about all I know about it, really. So that was a very interesting program tonight, wasn't it? And there we go, guys. Are you there, Chris? Or am I on my own? Looks like I'm on my own here.
Okay, no, you're still here. You're still there, John.
Did you hear all that?
Right. Are you there, John? Yes, we're still here. We're having lots of fun and games tonight. I mean, I've had my website cyber attacked. Gloria's also had a cyber attack. So we're really doing well. But it shows the powers that be are worried because they're going after the small fish now.
Could you hear what I was saying then, Chris? Could you hear what I was saying then?
Yes, yes. Okay. It's very interesting. Gloria is actually here. Shall we introduce Gloria now?
Yes, go ahead with Gloria. Please do.
Right, add to screen. Hello, Gloria. Are you there? Can you hear me?
I am.
You're on. That's good.
I can.
You can hear me.
Hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear. We
can. Can you hear me? Yeah.
I can hear you loud and clear, and I think the audience can hear you loud and clear. I'm going to disappear from the screen and let you speak because we've got a bandwidth problem. And let's keep our fingers crossed because we are sort of broadcasting by the seat of our pants. Excuse the crudity of that. So are you okay to carry on, Gloria? Can you hear me? So
I can hear. Can you hear me, Chris?
I can hear you loud and clear. So the Fire of London, as I was just saying to John, I believed until recently the official line because I had no reason not to. But you've studied this, your professor, Gloria Moss, PhD, and you've really gone into it deeply. So far away, it's over to you.
Well, I was first intrigued by the story, must be over 20 years ago, on reading that Sir Christopher Wren, who was the architect, we're told, of St. Paul's Cathedral, only ever went abroad on one occasion in his life, and that was in 1665 to Paris, a year before the Great Fire of London. And he stayed in Paris for about 9 months, and he consulted some of the greatest architects around at that time, and took a particular interest in domed buildings. And it intrigued me that a year later, with the advent of the Great Fire, he was able to do what he...
Oh dear, I think we've lost Gloria there. I've got a feeling.
He ever went overseas to Paris, and that was the year before the Great Fire, returning in March, just a few months before the fire erupted in September. How does that sound to you, Chris?
Interesting. We lost you for a short time there. I don't quite know what we lost, but you're coming over to the audience. I think everybody can hear you, and if they can't, they'll soon tell us in chat. So you're coming over rather loud and clear. John is here in the background, but what I'm doing to save bandwidth is when you speak, I just edge out. So when you want to go over and we can look in chat, just say, okay. So we got up to, if you could just refresh what you've just said about this chappie going overseas, please. Okay.
Christopher Wren. This is what first ignited my interest more than 20 years ago. The fact that he only ever went overseas once in his lifetime, and that was to Paris in 1665, the year before the Great Fire of London. And he took a particular interest in domed buildings. He returned in March 1666, and hey presto, a few months later, he has the opportunity to rebuild St. Paul's Cathedral in the wake of the Great Fire of London. Well, I don't know how that strikes people listening today, but I thought, well, that's all a bit of a coincidence, really interesting. So I started digging around. And as you said, Chris, the official story, which you will see still today, repeated on just about every site that you read, note, for example, the BBC History site, will tell you that the Great Fire of London happened after a long, dry summer. The city had suffered a drought. At that time, they say there was no organized fire service. And, well, what do we know? Thomas Fariner, the baker in Pudding Lane, so we're told, hadn't done his last-minute checks properly at night, and he'd allowed a fire to ignite. And it was Thomas Fariner who, because of his negligence, essentially, was responsible for the Great Fire of London. That is the official story, as we're told. And what I could do tonight is actually just take you through the discoveries that I made when I was digging into this story. As I say, ignited by my suspicions about Christopher Wren happening to go to Paris just 1 year before the Great Fire of London. And that was the only time Christopher Wren went overseas. In a long life, he died well into his 90s, did Christopher Wren. So shall I continue with what I found?
Would you like to?
I'd like our listeners or viewers to imagine that we're Sherlock Holmes.
That's interesting, Sherlock Holmes.
Say it again, Chris.
Would you like to actually have a look to see what people are saying in chat? Because it's rather interesting. I mean, for example, We've got a chappie called Jammy Dodger who said, how many died? But I think that's a little bit later on in the story as we get on, so we'll probably get onto that later. And we've also got Greg who says, I wonder whether the Jesuits had their sticky paws around this profound historical event. That's another one for a little bit later on. So when you're ready, we can go ahead. And I think this is going to be a very interesting story because far away, when you find a little break, we're going to have a look in chat. Okay. But excuse me zooming off the screen because I'm trying to save bandwidth. Okay. So it's over to you.
Yes. So picking up on the point about deaths, it's alleged that the fire destroyed slightly over 13,000 houses, 87 parish churches, the Royal Exchange, Guildhall, and of course St Paul's Cathedral. And how did this affect people? Well, it affected people's lives in quite a devastating fashion. It's estimated that around 100,000 people by this fire. And well, financially, it had a major impact because about 80% of London was destroyed by the Great Fire. And the value of the properties that were destroyed in today's values really is put at around £1.5 billion. So an awful lot of property was lost. So I thought it might be interesting to consider whether this was a plot. Somebody mentioned a Jesuit plot. Could it possibly have been a plot? Well, I started reading around again. And when you read accounts of the Great Fire of London, and I'm sure John found this as well, most commentators just rehash the official story that Thomas Fariner, bless his soul, was negligent and didn't do his final checks of the day properly. And we have an academic whose name is Marshall, who says that anybody who suspects anything other than the official story is suffering from a plot mentality, are the two words that Marshall uses. But I was pretty persistent, and I'm not sure that Marshall has got it right, because many people will know of the monument building that was built near the underground station called Monument by Christopher Wren to commemorate the Great Fire. And until 1830, this monument building actually had an inscription that described the treachery and malice of the Papish faction that brought about the Great Fire. So already in the monument, the original inscription on the monument, we have intimations of a plot. And Fariner, of course, everybody was trying to pin the blame on Fariner. In the sessions that he attended at the Old Bailey in 1660, that the fire was absolutely set fire on purpose. Was he just trying to clear his name, or was there evidence of a plot? Well, I'd like to suggest that he may have been onto something. And I think there are at least 7 reasons that Sherlock Holmes would have been extremely suspicious about what happened. And I don't know, Chris, if you want me to fire ahead, excuse the pun, and go through some of these 7 factors.
That would be
and
very
then at the end of each, maybe your readership could decide what they think. That I always think that it's the anomalies one needs to look for.
That's right.
The facts don't quite marry up together. So can I take you through some of these 7 points that leave me with a strange kind of suspicion?
Yes, please. And we've got some very interesting questions in chat. So please fire away. And when you feel ready, I can actually put these questions in chat to you. So fire away.
There are 7 factors. 7 factors. I'll just list the 7 factors. The first is to do with fires in general at the time in the 17th century. The second is to do what we're told about the direction of the wind in September 1666, which is when the fire took place. Then something about the pitch that people claim was responsible for igniting the fire. Then something on some rather interesting anomalies. Then something on the action that was taken by the authorities of the day. Then some more info on Sir Christopher Wren himself. And finally, something on the king of the time, King Charles II. So shall we start with fires? Do you remember a lot of websites say that the fire was caused by the fact that there'd been a drought and the conditions were very dry at the time? And this is why the fire took hold with such vengeance. But when I read around, what I found was that fires were very common at that time. And in fact, that might explain the extremely relaxed attitude that was taken on the part of contemporaries who witnessed the fire of London. So Pepys, Samuel Pepys, we've all heard, I'm sure, of the diarist Samuel Pepys. In his diaries, he writes that at 3 a.m. on the 2nd of September, he saw the fire from his window and thought it far enough away to justify going back to bed. And he wrote that he was unused to seeing the kind of fire that followed. Indeed, the London Gazette, which published twice a week, in the Monday edition of the London Gazette, they were so, this was right at the beginning of the fire, they were so casual, relaxed about the fire, that it hardly got a mention at all in the London Gazette. In fact, they just ran a very small item on the fire, among gossip about the Prince of Sax's unconsummated marriage to the Princess of Denmark, and something about a storm in the English Channel. It certainly wasn't making the headlines in the London Gazette. So how can we explain the fact that although fires were very common at that time, this one became so enormous as to wreak so much damage? Well, as I said, commentators talk about the hot summer, the dry summer, and that the houses, here's one commentator, creaked with dry joints. But if you do your homework, you'll find that there was a fire just 30 years previous in 1633. That was also a time of drought. And this particular fire didn't destroy any more than 122 buildings. And just compare that with the 300 buildings which were burnt down in the space of just the first morning of the Great Fire of London. So we're comparing the destruction of 122 buildings in 1633 from the effects of one fire then, with the burning of 300, 3 times that number, on just the morning of, as we know, days. So it's a little bit strange if we just look at it at the level of fires. Now, I don't know if anybody wants to comment on fires before we look at the next point relating to the wind.
Certainly. By the way, I don't know whether you'd like to add this in at the moment, but you have actually got a conference coming up. Would you like me to add this now, Gloria? Mm-hmm. With John Hamer, righto. And if the technical bits go correct, and here it is. And it's on the 16th or 18th of July 2021. I believe it's in Northants, Gloria? And you'll be speaking?
No, we've moved to Staffordshire. We've actually moved to an even nicer venue and more capacious venue, in fact, in Staffordshire. So people who would like to come along, there'll be space to accommodate you, and you'll be extremely welcome. We're in Staffordshire now, a lovely training venue near to a little town on a canal called Stone. And if you're interested in finding out more, do email us. The email that you can see there, for some unaccountable reason, went down today, just like that. Mm-hmm. So can I give you another email? Please feel to contact on this email. It's, have you got your pens, everybody? It's Gloria hyphen, that's above the line, Moss, MOSS, at hotmail.co.uk.
Well,
So
as
that's
you're
Gloria-Moss@hotmail.co.uk. And we'll be spending 3 days with like-minded people in animated discussion with some wonderful speakers like John, who's actually giving us no fewer than 4 talks. And we're very grateful to John for doing that.
I just got my fingers crossed now with the bandwidth. I hope I'm not cutting you out. Oh, I think I am cutting you out. Sorry, John. Don't take it personally.
Don't worry, Chris, it's fine. I'll go back to sleep now.
Right. Sorry, mate. I'm pushing you out tonight. I'm trying to save on bandwidth. So let's go to Gloria. Oh dear, we go back to Gloria. So we keep our fingers crossed here. Is it okay, Gloria? As you're talking, I'll put the contact email across the screen, and I can be typing that out. So,
thank you.
Would you like me to read out a few comments, or shall we carry straight on?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay. Right. We've got here. There's so many. Please excuse me, because if I don't read them all out, please don't take it personally. It's very nice. Angela's very said, sorry to hear you're unwell, John. Lovely you decided to join us. Yes, he's been quite ill with the lurgy that's going around. And we've got Kevin Keener says it just shows how much our history is fake. And Kevin says, hi, Gloria. I think he probably knows you. I don't know. And we've got here Greg Lord. I wonder whether the Jesuits had their sticky paws around this profound historical event. Well, we might go on to that. I don't know. And you did cover this question, how many died? And we've got here, hello, Kat. It's got Kat Holdsworth. Check out, oh, yes, you've hit a raw nerve here, yes. Check out Anatoly Fomenko's Autochronology. Really mind-blowing on duplicated dynasties. It's a different subject from tonight, but I believe we'll discuss that a little bit later. That is fantastic. And somebody's put here, Jobby Dodger, I'll keep saying Jammy Dodger, says another great reset, no doubt. And then there's something else we'll be going on to, I think. This is Kat Holdsworth, says, think 6066. I can never pronounce this. Sorry, Gloria. Was it Sesticuvi? Sestiquevi. I can never pronounce it. Followed shortly afterwards. That's interesting. Now let's go down a little bit further. Seems like we're living very much so. Kevin says, seems like we're living through similar times. And somebody said 9/11. Well, we may be going on to that a little later. We got herbalist specialists, perhaps multiple seats of fire set simultaneously. That's interesting. That is very interesting. And we've got here, we got Edge Crusher. Hello, Chris from Hoddesdon Meetup. That's Stand in the Park. Yes, very pleased to meet you. Hello, Edge Crusher. Yes, we met briefly 2 weeks ago. Well, thank you very much for coming on live tonight. It's much appreciated. And anyway, Gloria, over to you. So I'll just sort of slide off to save on bandwidth. So if we could just summarize where we're going. So we've got to the stage where, 300 properties have actually been burnt down. And a question I'll have from myself later is, what happened to all the homeless people? So that's something that
300 properties that were burnt down was just on the first morning, Chris.
First morning.
And a previous fire in 1633 burnt down a third of those number of houses across the whole of that fire. The point I'm making is that a far greater number of houses burnt during the Great Fire of 1666 than had happened in a previous fire in 1633. The scale of this fire was far, far in excess of the scale of the previous fire in 1633. Because altogether, overall, as I mentioned at the beginning, the number of houses burnt down by the Great Fire of London, 1666, exceeded 13,000. Compare that with the 133 houses burnt down in 1633. It's a completely different beast you're dealing with when you're looking at the Great Fire of London.
Well, that's
this
right.
was no ordinary fire. No
right.
ordinary fire at all.
So
should we go on to the second factor?
Study fire. Well, certainly. I mean, we had to study fire, and it is a very strange beast. I have a lot of respect for firemen. They've got to know their stuff, and it is. But please go on to the second factor.
Second factor is the wind. Well, I shouldn't laugh because it's a pretty important factor.
Oh dear, I think we've lost Gloria there. Let's see if we can get her back again. Hello, Gloria. Cooey. Oh dear. Hello, John. You're on again. I think Gloria has...
Can I just chip in then, Chris?
Sorry?
Could I just chip in for a minute then, as soon as Gloria's taken a vacation?
Certainly. We've lost connection there. You know, I think these 2 tin cans and a piece of string, I think someone's cut the string.
Yeah, no, I was just intrigued with what she was just saying then about the 130. Note these numbers, okay? 133 buildings destroyed in 1633. This has got all the hallmarks of our friends, the Freemasons, on it, hasn't it? Those numbers are just too ridiculous to be coincidental, in my view. And I don't know whether Gloria herself has picked up on this or not. She's back. Hi, Gloria.
Gloria, we lost you. So I'm sorry if you were sort of speaking, but you sort of drifted off. As I said, somebody cut the piece of string between the 2 tin cans, I think. So we've now got connection again. Can you hear me, Gloria? I don't think so. Gloria? Cooey. Oh dear, isn't modern technology marvelous? Hang on, what I'll do, I'll remove, I'll come back again. I think we lost Gloria again. Never mind. I'll bring John back in. Sorry, John, I think we've lost Gloria again.
It's jolly fun, isn't it? So what do you reckon to those numbers, Chris? Do you think that sounds jolly damn suspicious to you? Because it certainly does to me.
Sorry, can you repeat that? I didn't quite catch it.
What do you think of those numbers that I just mentioned? Oh, well, Gloria just mentioned. 133 houses, buildings destroyed in the fire of 1633. You know,
but it's all three, that's right, all 3, 6, and 9. You know, it's... Hello, I've got 2 Glorias here. What's happening? Oh, hang on, let's remove that one. Hello, Gloria, can you hear us? It's like a seance, isn't it? Can you hear us?
Is there anybody there?
Oh, hello, are you on the other side? Do you think, John, that we might have to carry this on the naughty radio station that we're going to do, because I think the connection's so terrible that we can't. Let's see if we can get up back. I'll have one more try. So what you said about the numbers, and also numerology wise, all the 3 6s and 9s, 666.
Absolutely.
Very interesting. Oh, she's gone again. So it's just us 2 again. So looking at this logically, it's a very interesting story, and I think we're going to have to carry on the radio with this. Hang on, device not connection. She's come back again, and I'll give it one more try with Gloria. Here she comes. Her picture's not on the screen. Ah, here she is. Now, let's have a look. Gloria, can you hear us? Are you there? Gloria?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yep.
Unfortunately, fortunately,
Okay.
John and I
Should I
have been
just
winging
keep
it.
going as quickly as I can until I get cut off again? Should I just keep going?
Can you just start where we certainly, but if you could start back from where I said, okay, over to you, because we lost it then. So you were going to carry on.
Yeah.
So
okay.
please.
So I was going to say about the wind. Yeah, I'll carry on as quickly as I can.
Okay.
So the London Gazette reported that they offered what they said was a true account of the fire. And in this so-called true account of the fire, they explained that a violent easterly wind fermented the fire and kept it burning all day and the night following, and so on and so forth. So they talk about this violent easterly wind. Can you hear me, Chris? I hope you can.
Yes,
and this violent easterly wind was a very interesting easterly wind because the fire actually spread in a northerly direction and then in a southerly direction. Well, I don't think it takes a brain scientist, a genius, to see that that's a very unusual thing to happen if you have an easterly wind. And I'm not the only one to be to find this rather curious. So at the time, there was a nonconformist minister called Thomas Vincent who wrote about the fire. And Thomas Vincent referred to the strange spreading of the fire. That's interesting, isn't it? He talked about it spreading in a very strange way. And he actually said that on the second day of the fire worked fast against the wind. So much so that the wind actually went to the fire actually spread to the east against the wind. It went all the way up to Tower Street. And John Evelyn, the diarist, he also talked about a fierce eastern wind and noticed how the fire kindled back against the wind as well as forward. How does this sound to you? All rather strange, no?
It's very suspicious.
In other words, the fire is spreading in a way that you really wouldn't expect with a strong easterly wind. It's going north, it's going south, and it's going east against the wind. So those are the points I wanted to make about the wind. Shall we press on before I get disconnected again?
Well, certainly one little point I was going to
pick up on comments in a little bit, maybe.
I've worked on.
I want to talk about the third.
Certainly, okay. Carry on. You still there, Gloria? Hello? You still there?
Yep.
Okay. If you'd like to carry on, we'll carry on that, and I'll
I'm here
afterwards. Okay. So if you'd like to carry on about the third.
Okay. I'm just afraid I'll get disconnected. So I'd like to get the key points that I found across. The third point relates to the temperature of this fire. And we can deduce the temperature from the melted piece of pottery that was found in a shop actually in Pudding Lane, near where the fire started. And the London Museum has this in their collection, these melted pieces of pottery. And they estimate that the temperatures that the fire reached must have been as high as 1,700 degrees Celsius. And that is an extraordinarily high temperature. And it's my guess that temperatures as high as that could only have been made with manufactured oxygen currents, as typically are found in firestorms. And at the time, the British Navy was quite arms. So they were engaging with the Dutch in warfare. They were burning their boats, setting fire to villages, and they were doing all of that with great efficiency. So I'd like to suggest that some of the enormous heat in the fire is not what you might expect from a city fire, but may have been provoked in some way. Let's move on to the fourth point, which concern other anomalies. And I will refer you back to our nonconformist minister, Thomas Vincent. And here's what Thomas Vincent noticed. Well, he found what happened to St. Paul's Cathedral rather interesting. And he was surprised that the cathedral, which was the largest in Britain and the third largest cathedral in Europe,
oh dear.
first of all, the building was actually made of stone, not made of timber. And the stone began to peel off, according to Thomas Vincent. He said it peeled off strangely from the sides of the walls. Secondly, St. Paul's Cathedral was set extremely high up. There weren't any houses around it. So how could it have caught fire? This cathedral that was standing with an enormous amount of open space around it. And then there's an engraving of St. Paul's Cathedral in the fire, having caught fire. And the fire looks as though it's taken root inside the cathedral. It's quite a famous engraving made by somebody called Holler. And the fire really does look as though it's engulfing the cathedral from inside, not from outside. How on earth did that happen? Well, Thomas Vincent did speak of rumours that fireballs were thrown at the cathedral to stoke the furious flames. Maybe that had a part in it. And in fact, there were rumours that French and Dutch people were involved in stoking up this fire. All very interesting, I think. So there were anomalies which didn't go unnoticed by a contemporary with the sharpness of mind of somebody like Thomas Vincent. And I don't know how many of your listeners know that actually a Frenchman was actually executed as the perpetrator of the fire. I mean, I was never taught that at school. I don't know if you were. His name was Robert Hubert, and he was actually executed. He confessed to the crime, and he was executed for having aided and abetted the fire. He said he was actually recruited the previous year, 1665, in Paris. I thought that was interesting. We talked about 1665 and Wren's visit to Paris in that year, didn't we? Far be it from me to suggest any sort of connection, of course. So those are some of the anomalies. Let's move on to the fifth point relating to the authorities and the action or inaction on the part of the authorities. Beginning with firefighting. Although a lot of the accounts of the fire say that there wasn't much of a firefighting force at that time, there was a system for dealing with fires. The Mayor of London could authorise the pulling down of buildings in order to clear a way so that the fire couldn't move from one building to another. But the Lord Mayor at the time, who was Thomas Bloodworth, he declared the fire so small. This is such a famous quote. I'm sure many of you know it. He declared the fire was so small that a woman might piss it out, he said. And so he waited until the third day before doing anything. Is that not extraordinary? Maybe it reminds of another big event just over 20 years ago, where nothing was done for quite a while. Bloodworth, the Lord Mayor, also declined to supply additional soldiers on the first day of the fire. Okay, well, leaving aside the Lord Mayor, there were also, there was a system of men appointed to stand at fire posts. But going back to Samuel Pepys, the diarist, he observed that on the first day, nobody was there at their fire posts to quench the fire. Is that not bizarre? Those men should have been there to quench the fire. And on the that's the fifth. The other John E. He noted how the gentleman, and I'm quoting from Evelyn, began the day here. Oh, sorry, the fourth day. He noted on that day, the men began to bestir themselves, and not till now, because they had stood as men interdict with their hands across. So what do we learn from John Evelyn? Basically, nobody was doing any firefighting until the fourth day. And then on the Thursday, the 6th of September, which was the fifth and final day of the fire, we have the testimony so is it purposeful negligence? Be very interesting.
I think we've lost you again, dear Gloria. Was it possibly negligence?
To the fact that although people dealing with the fire happened at a snail's pace, and actually nobody did anything until the fifth day of the fire. In complete contrast to that, after the fire was over, things really went at a pace in terms of what the authorities did. Let me give you an idea. Just 3 days after the fire, the city established a committee to recovery out of the fire.
I think we might have lost Gloria there. Let's have a look. Gloria. Oh dear. Oh dear. It's just getting him in more interesting as well. Gloria, I think she's probably carrying on reading, not realizing she's not on air. Let's have a look. See if we can add her to the screen. I think we've lost Gloria, John. Yeah, I don't know what's going on there. She's dropped out. This is the connection. Oh, hang on, we got the connection back again. So we've got to pick up where we went before. So sorry about this, John. So ta-ta, John. Hello, Gloria. Gloria, we lost your connection again. Hello. We got you again. You cut out about a minute or so ago.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes. Can
you hear me, Chris?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so let's do it without the visuals. I'll just try and get through this information, okay, and then we can have a discussion. Is that okay?
That's fine. Okay, now I'm going to carry on.
So what we're saying is even though the firefighting happened at a snail's pace and almost didn't happen at all, what happened in the aftermath of the fire happened at an extraordinary speed. So that just 2 weeks after the fire, a committee was appointed to inquire into the causes of the fire. And then just under a month after the fire, a committee was appointed for the rebuilding of London. Can you believe it? They acted so quickly. And royal appointments included, guess who? Christopher Wren, Hugh May, Sir Roger Pratt, and other architects, Robert Hooke, Edward Jarman and Peter Mills. Now that all came into being just a month after the last embers disappeared. So what I'm saying is the authorities were capable of acting with enormous speed after the fire was over, but they didn't act with speed while the fire was blazing. What else do we know about the authorities? Well, I'd like to say something about the suppression of information. People were arrested who published and sold unlicensed books and broadsheets. I'll just say that again because it's so extraordinary. People who published and sold unlicensed books and broadsheets, in other words, information that wasn't the official narrative, were arrested. And the Privy Council the following year ordered the public burning of a pamphlet that could have provided evidence that was presented to the Commons inquiry into the causes of the fire. So we've got suppression and the burning of evidence. Have we come across this before? Maybe your viewers can comment on that later.
Oh, yes.
And then the last point I really want to make is that the third thing that the authorities did with seeming alacrity was spring into action with new legislation. And you've already mentioned the SDKV Act, which was a renewal of, I believe, of previous pieces of legislation. It was passed behind closed doors, and it ensured that all men and women of the UK were declared dead and lost beyond the sea. And on the back of that, the state took everybody and everybody's property into trust. And we have admiralty law in the wake of that. But not only did they do that, at the time, the law favoured landlords over tenants. And I don't know how many of your viewers know that if a building burnt down, as many did during the Fire of London, it wasn't the landlord who was liable to pay for the repair. It was actually the tenants who were liable. But after Robert Hubert was executed, that law was temporarily in abeyance because it was analogous to an act of war. And so a new piece of legislation had to be passed that passed responsibility back to the tenants. The poor tenants bore the brunt of the rebuilding of the Great Fire of London, not the landlords. The landlords made a killing from the Great Fire of London. And finally, we're talking about the final piece of legislation. An awful lot of rebuilding took place after the Great Fire, and that caused an explosion in the debts of the City of London Corporation and caused it to default 16 years later in 1683. For manoeuvring, this default meant that the corporation was no longer a legal entity that was responsible for its debts. So by some wonderful legal sleight of hand, the Corporation of London was let off all of its debts. Just like that. Is that not extraordinary? And I just want to finish by talking about Wren and King Charles. You might ask, Sherlock Holmes might ask, cui bono, who benefited from all of this? And so far we've said that the landlords seem to have benefited because the tenants had to bear the brunt of the costs of rebuilding the City of London. But who else might have benefited? Well, there in the wings we have Sir Christopher. Do you remember I mentioned he'd been abroad only once in his life, and that was the year before the Great Fire in 1665. And that intrigued me. Why did he go abroad in 1665? Wren was a mathematician, an astronomer. He was not an architect. In fact, before the Great Fire of London, he'd only ever had 2 commissions. And I know, Chris, you were an architect. Tell me what you think of this. He'd only designed 2 buildings. One was a chapel at Pembroke College, Cambridge, and that was commissioned by his uncle, the Bishop of Ely. I think we call that nepotism, don't we? And the other building he designed was the Sheldonian Theatre in Oxford. Those were the only 2 buildings he designed. His career took off after the Great Fire. Extraordinary.
That is bent, isn't it?
And after the Great Fire, well, he built St. Paul's Cathedral, he built most of the city churches, and so on and so forth. And, well, I started looking at the official website for St. Paul's Cathedral because I wanted to see some of the great Sir Christopher Wren's drawings. And all the drawings had been curated by the then curator, this is contemporary times now, of St. Paul's Cathedral. And the curator had found that not all the drawings were in the hands of one person. He found a number of different hands were responsible for the drawings of St. Paul's Cathedral. And, well, blow me, the curator, this is just a few years ago, he estimated that the drawings contributed by Sir Christopher Wren himself amounted to no more than about 11% of the drawings. He didn't give that figure. I just calculated it myself, simple arithmetic, from the number of drawings provided. So basically, Christopher Wren was delegating the work to others. He was not an architect. He didn't do the work himself. And in fact, the curator of St. Paul's Cathedral described the drawings of Wren as lacking 3D shading. They were all very two-dimensional, he said, the curator of St. Paul's Cathedral. Who else might have benefited? And we'll just finish on this note. I think possibly the King, King Charles II. As you know, he'd spent some of his years in exile in France. He developed a taste for French clothes. His tailor, for example, was a Frenchman. He liked the idea of having a modern city. I mean, London at that time, before the Great Fire, was a timber city. No, he wanted something much finer than that. He wanted a city of stone. And this is what the Great Fire of London delivered to him. So what can we say in conclusion? Well, I'm going to leave the final word to viewers, but it seems to me that if you look at the evidence, there are very large numbers of anomalies here, starting with the fact that fires were common at that time, even during dry years. They didn't wreak the damage that we saw with the Great Fire. The temperatures were extraordinarily high. There was an easterly wind blowing, and yet the fire went to the north, to the south, and to the east, all very peculiar. Thomas Fariner said that he was innocent. He said he'd really checked Pudding Lane before the fire. And then we saw all the anomalies with St. Paul's Cathedral itself. How did it catch fire? When it was set high up, it was surrounded by empty space, not by houses. And what about Sir Christopher Wren? How did he emerge into the great architect when he was a mathematician and an astronomer? So lots of questions which we can throw back to your listeners and viewers.
That is brilliant. Thanks, Gloria. That really is brilliant. And you know, you think it's opening up a Pandora's box for me of similar events throughout history that are very, very strangely linked. Now, should we go into chat, Gloria? Should we go into chat? Well, I think
yes,
okay.
Definitely.
Right.
I'd be interested to know what you think. All I'm doing, Chris, is presenting the evidence.
Well, I think the evidence, there's two things. One thing is with architecture, people don't realize that architects tend to do fewer drawings. They're more managers. Most buildings are actually designed by technicians. When I say designed, a technician puts the components together and makes sure they're like a translators. I'm a technician. So you have to understand what the architect wants and then do the construction drawings so that someone on site understands how to put it together. So you've got to be very, very practical. And that's why a lot of technicians are site architects or site architects on Billingsgate and things like that, because what's happening is the building is actually practicality gets in the way. You can only design so far, and with a site architect you've got to often, I've actually been on site and actually drawn details out literally on site and given it to someone. That is how fast you've got to work, and you've got to design things sort of on the spot. So the 11% of drawings he did do, yeah, I mean, as I say, a building as large as St Paul's, there would have been a lot of technicians working on it. But in those days, the architect did more, and I think that's a bit suspicious. I really do, because he would, he wouldn't have done the nitty-gritty construction drawings, but he would have done a large amount more than about 11%. So I do think that's a bit iffy. As for the fire, I actually worked on the Hong Kong Shanghai Bank, the dealing rooms there, and soon afterwards, the RAs blew it up. But the strange thing is, I don't think they like me, but the weird thing is with explosions, you get positive and negative effects. And the way you explain the fire, it sounds to me as if there was, I haven't got the evidence, gunpowder involved because of positive and negative effects. For example, in a gale, tiles on a roof do not blow off of a roof, they get sucked off of a roof. So if the wind is blowing from the south, the tiles from the north side of a roof will come off, if they're loose, of course, and vice versa. It's a negative effect. So to me, it sounds like explosive charges, or well, they didn't have explosive charges, but gunpowder may be involved. And we've got some very interesting statements. Is there anything you wish to add, Gloria? Hello, Gloria.
No.
You wish to... Yes, sir.
No.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
No. Yes,
Yeah.
I can hear you. We'll bring John in a little bit later because he's sitting there. He's there. We've got here Edge Crusher, Baldy chap with a bit. I remember you, mate. Yeah. Sorry, that was a stand in the park in where I went to. Yeah, you came from Chestnut, I think. Right, here we go. Now we've got here 1633, 1666. This is Kevin Keener. Check out the numbers. Coincidence? I don't think so. That's interesting, isn't it? And then we've got here Ninja Man, Dimatra, numerology all over history. Yes, that's quite correct. Then we've got Sean Hamer. Didn't Wren lay out the plan for post-fire City of London to match the Kabbalistic tree of life? Interesting. Then we've got Kevin Keener. Yes, Ninja Man numbers. That's their thing, that the hand signs, colours, you get my jest. And as we go down here, we've got here an interesting one. 6 builds, 6 sack better. Build. Oh, that's clever. I'm afraid you have to see this on the screen. That is very clever. That is a real cracker, that one. He must have been. You can't really read it out, can you? You've got to see it. It's visual. Now, right, okay. And now this is an interesting one. This is Kevin Keener. I'm a stone restorer, and I have never heard of stone peeling. Now that's interesting. That is very interesting. I know stone, certain types of stone, explode in fires. Now this is Cat Holdsworth. Same crew still attacking churches today, mainly in France, and pretending it is, I won't say the word, naughty people, which we know is cover for Western political tactics. So if you say certain words, it sends off klaxon horns in YouTube HQ. New World Order is real. They did it so they could build back better. Interesting. There's another one here. Perhaps the wind and wind pressure intensified the fire, and fire spread by the Venturi principle. Yes, I got an example of that because I worked with a chap who was on the Dresden raid during World War II, and the bottom of his aircraft was warm, and they're flying at a very high rate, and that was eventually, it's quite interesting. That's a different subject. Oh yes, history repeats itself. Same old story, different century. That's right, Kevin. You're spot on there. And now this is an interesting. We've got here wooden stone spool with the sudden extreme heat, which could be mistaken for peeling or spalling. Yes, that's interesting. I don't know. I'm more into concrete modern day. I don't know much about stone. It's a specialist subject. Sean Hamer, plus the Treaty of Peace, Paris, of the Holy Roman Empire was signed in the same decade by federal Freemasons and British Qui Tam lawyers. Oh, that's interesting. Very interesting. Now, this is interesting. The New World Order is real. This is a gentleman, sorry, someone called that. Might be a lady, I don't know. That's a classic movie silencing people with another opinion. Haven't seen that before. Yes. And we've got here, Sean Hamer says 1763 to 1768. I think that's what he was talking about earlier, I believe. Right. Then we've got here, what we got here? Fed Freemasons, Ben Franklin, John Jay, John Adams. Don't know anything about that. Do you know anything about that, Gloria? Can you put any light on that? John, can you put any light on it? Don't know. Sorry. And didn't Wren bury cheese? Don't know. Masonic writing all over it. That's interesting. And then we've got here. Oh, I think we've lost. Hello, John. I think we've lost Gloria again. She came up twice on the screen and then disappeared. That was fascinating. And was it here? It got Jobby Dodger says, sorry, it was Samuel Pepys that buried cheese.
Yeah, he buried his parmesan and his wine in a pit in the back garden.
Yeah. Then we've got, was the slogan "Buildy Backy Better"? Haven't it? Well, when you look at what goes on today, what Gloria was saying about that fire, to me, is the evidence is that it was planned to rebuild London.
Yeah.
And that reminds me of something that happened in World War II. Do you remember a couple of weeks ago, John, we were talking about anti-aircraft guns that were used in the poorer areas of London during the Blitz of London that destroyed and killed more people than the Blitz itself?
Yeah.
Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Because it was the East End and the poor areas that were hit the most. I mean, Hampstead, hardly a bomb dropped there. But, but I think we've got Gloria back now. That's quite interesting. That is. So I'll just, if you don't mind, John. Hope you don't. Sorry about this, mate. Keep pushing it, but thank you very much for filling in when Gloria disappears on this. It's very kind of you. It's much appreciated. And I know you've got out your sick bag to come on tonight, so that really is very kind of you. Thank you. So let's get back to Gloria. Hello, Gloria. Are you there? I think. Are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I am.
You did. As I said, it's a bit like a start. Are you there? Yes, I can hear you. Now, John has been very kindly. He's come out of his sick bed to fill in tonight, and it's very.
Thank
kind.
you, John. I'm so sorry
really
about my internet. I don't know what's happening to my.
I think the hamster got off the wheel or something. I don't know. Right. I've just said to John that there's very similar to what happened during World War II, when we was talking about this a couple of weeks ago, when anti-aircraft guns around the working class areas destroyed more property and killed more people than the enemy bombers did during the Blitz. And It was the East End, Hampstead, hardly a bomb dropped there. I don't think any did. So why was it? Admittedly, it was an industrial area, and you had the docks in the East End of London. But isn't it strange they put these anti-aircraft guns up, and of course what goes up must come down, and the shells came down and killed a lot of people and destroyed a lot of property. Don't you think there's a bit of a link to the Great Fire of London? Because I'm old enough to remember when they were in the sort of 70s and that they were building these horrible tower blocks as fast as they could go. So I know I've got off a track a little bit, but there's a lot of similarities. And what have we got now? Build back better?
Yeah, well, certainly the establishment seemed to reap enormous benefits from the Great Fire of London.
Well,
and not the run-of-the-mill people, not at all.
Yeah. Yes, you're quite right. But what I'm interested in is what happened to the homeless people, because that is something that's gone out. And also, I wonder if you can fill me in. Apparently, the Navy, what I was told when I was at school, was that the Navy bombed areas to flatten the property to stop the fire, because I know that in forest fires, they actually light a fire in front of the main fire, which they can control, because there's the old song that only forest fires prevent fire, which is true in a way, so that the forest fire can't move any further. And the Navy bombed houses. Can you fill us in on that a little bit, Gloria?
Well, that's what they used to do in those times, apparently, to stop the spread of fire. But as I mentioned, the Lord Mayor of London, Thomas Bloodworth, refused to call out the men to flatten the building so the fire spread. As I said, there was an awful lot of inactivity by the authorities while the fire was raging. But as soon as the fire had stopped and done its job after 5 days, they suddenly went into action, top speed, drawing up these committees to rebuild the fire. And they had those committees assembled within an indecently short period of time. As I said, did you hear me talking about the chronology where they were setting up these committees? They already had a Build Back Better, if you like, committee ready within a month of the Fire of London coming to an end. Within a month. They worked with extraordinary speed. Does that suggest some pre-planning, perhaps, that these people could work so quickly?
But back on that point about the Navy, I remember very, very clearly when I was at school and saying that the Navy were employed to flatten the buildings, and your research has shown that didn't happen. So
I'm not on this occasion.
Lies at school from that, because I would have said a couple of days. That's really shaken me. That has, because I can remember that very clearly. We covered the Fire of London, and they said, "Oh yes, the Navy was sent in immediately to flatten the buildings." Yet, what really happened was they weren't sent in immediately to flatten the buildings. I wonder if
the buildings were not flattened. And Thomas Ferriner, who was the scapegoat, and his family along with him, until he died. And he died just 4 years after the Great.
Oh, poor chap.
Which is a shame, isn't it, that he only lived till 1670. And he was still relatively young at that point. I think he was a man of about 50 when he died. So he was no longer around to tell the tale.
But that's interesting. I wonder if John, hang on, just quickly bring John in. John, when you was at school, I don't know if you covered the Fire of London, but I really clearly remembered it. It was one of the big things. Oh yes, the Navy came in, they bombarded areas to flatten it. And the fact was, they didn't do it immediately. I'm quite surprised. It shows that we were told a pack of lies. Was you told?
I never knew that bit about the Navy. I mean, obviously, I'm sure it's right. I mean, I don't know. Well, I say I'm sure it's right. I don't know. But one thing that does strike me from everything that Gloria said is it just reflects so many other false flag kind of situations where things are not actually done deliberately, but they are actually through inaction are allowed to happen. You know, that we saw that at 9/11, whereas and we saw that with the JFK assassination as well, where the security detail was stood down. It's just a typical false flag scenario. Nothing changes, does it? The centuries roll on, but nothing much changes. So yeah, it was brilliant that, by the way, Gloria. Really well done.
Well, thank you, John. And it is astonishing, is it not, to find that nobody seemed to be fighting the fire until the final day of the fire, day 5. That the firefighting forces were inactive. And yet the authorities couldn't work fast enough after the fire was over to start rebuilding the fire.
That's the city.
Interesting,
yes.
that, no?
That is very, very interesting. That is, and also,
In fact, you might say
between the
that
lines,
they worked
as well.
They worked with unseemly haste after the fire was over to start the rebuilding.
9/11. There's another one, very similar. History repeats itself. Wow.
But it does behove us, I think, to reveal these facts, and they are facts, to the world at large. And John does a wonderful job with his falsification of history, putting history right. And you do a lot of that as well, Chris.
Thank you.
This is how we repair some of the false information that we've been brought up with.
Well, that's right, and more so. I mean, when you look at the propaganda that was put out during the Second World War, a lot of it's still believed today, and people will argue with you and say, I mean, for example, when I was at school, I often said this. They'd say, "Who built Stonehenge?" And put your hand out and you say, "It's a druid." Correct. Get a star. Wrong. The druids used it, but they didn't build it. It's a lot older than the druids, and these things you thought of as being correct, but the amount of lies, unbelievable. I mean, it sounds to me as if I'd like to look into Christopher Wren's life a bit more. And I got a feeling he might have been a member of the old boys club, shall we say? He certainly had his foot in the door in certain places, and that happens a lot with
It's alleged he was a master of a certain group.
Well, slap my thigh. I mean, I worked in offices where there's only a handful of us that weren't members of the brigade. I've actually been, I think John has as well. I've actually been given, because I probably scratched my head or something at the wrong time, I've actually been given, shall we say, funny handshakes, which I didn't understand because I'm not a member and never would be and never want to be.
Far be it, Chris, far be it for me to name any particular group. I have just read en passant, and I don't know if it's true or not, that he was high up in a particular group, but I wouldn't like to say which that group was.
Yes,
but clearly he was a man. Clearly he was a man of great influence because, as I mentioned, before the fire, he'd only ever designed 2 buildings. And the commission for one of those buildings, that was Pembroke College at Cambridge, had come from his uncle, the Bishop of Ely. So, I mean, I don't know if you'd use the word merit in that case. It was his uncle who got him that job. I don't know how he got the job for the Sheldonian Theatre in Oxford, which is a rather beautiful building. But those are the only 2 buildings that he'd to his credit, that he'd built before the fire of London. So why did the world look to this one man to rebuild St. Paul's Cathedral and so many city churches?
That's right.
I don't have the answer to that question, but it's a question that's worth posing, I think.
Well, let's put it this way. I was an outsider because I'm not a member of any organisations, shall we say. I don't join clubs or anything like that, but some of the things I saw going on, I can really quite understand how Wren got those contracts. I really, I mean, there are certain things.
And as I say, the curator, the modern curator of St Paul's Cathedral, look at the official website for St Paul's Cathedral, and there's a section on the draftsman. It's called the draftsman of St Paul's Cathedral, and he went to enormous trouble to work out and separate the different hands involved in the drawings, and very large number of hands involved, and I just counted up the for no more than 11% of all the drawings, and yet he's down in history as the architect of St Paul's Cathedral. It was actually Hawksmoor. Hawksmoor. He designed far more of the drawings. He produced far more of the drawings of St Paul's Cathedral than did Christopher Wren. Why is St Paul's Cathedral not known as the work of Hawksmoor, for example, who designed, I believe, the church in Spitalfields, where they used to have a festival every summer, I think it was. No, it's Christopher Wren who's down as the architect of St Paul's Cathedral.
But it could be. I mean,
and in fact, by August, can I just get this one fact in? By August, before the fire, by August 1666, Wren had ordered in the parts necessary to build a dome for St Paul's Cathedral. I think I'm right in saying that. Have you got the chronology? The fire raged in September, and in August, the previous month, Wren had already ordered in the materials necessary to build a dome for St Paul's Cathedral. He'd always wanted a dome. He'd pressed several months prior to that to have the steeple replaced by a dome. He wasn't successful when he first put in his request.
It sounds like, remember the foot and mouth outbreak of 2001, where everything was ready before it even started. So they knew it was going to happen.
Interesting. Interesting.
And but what I was saying about the drawings, I can understand in a way there would be a few drawings by the main architect, because again, when you're on a major project, you'll have an office, depending on the size of the project, anything from 20 to 30 people doing the design drawings. And you might have one architect and about 20 or 30 technicians working on it. That can be understandable in a way. I mean, there's Hawksmoor, yes. I mean, architects and that. But I mean, for example, the Lloyd's building in London, one I particularly dislike. And if you go through all the drawings of that, and I think that was before, I think CAD was just coming in, that computer-aided design. Was coming in, you will find umpteen drawings by different names, different technicians to it, and that is, I can only go by what happens now, but I don't know about in the 17th century. But I would have thought in the 17th century the architect would have done much more, because things were much slower in those days. So I think you wouldn't have only had 11%. I think you'd have a lot more than that, because I know that architects don't generally go into the nitty gritty of the building, right into it, things.
And as I mentioned, the curator himself notes that the drawings produced by Christopher Wren lack the 3D shading that you find in many of the other drawings for St Paul's.
Well, it takes 7 years to become an architect. It's a long time. I think somebody once told me, and I don't know how long it takes to become a doctor, but I think it takes a shorter time to become a doctor than an architect. But I don't know how true. I don't know how long it takes to become a doctor. But that's what somebody told me, and I could be totally wrong on that one. But it is a little bit odd. Let's have poor old John there, suffering a bit. Shall we? I just flick over to John. Hello, John. Sorry, mate, we're not leaving you out. Have you got anything to add on this at all? Hello, I think you turned his microphone off. Cooey!
Sorry. Yeah, I switched it off because I keep coughing and sneezing.
Yeah.
I didn't know whether it would actually impinge on what was being said, so I switched my mic off. I mean, I just think the whole thing is just such a typical false flag situation. You know, it's got all the elements there. You know, standing back and allowing things to happen by inaction. You know, as Gloria said, things being prepared in advance for it. You know, they knew it was coming, obviously. Yeah, it just all makes perfect sense, doesn't it? As with all the other false flag stories that we hear. You know, it's not a nice story, but it's logical. You know, and the conclusions are logical. So yeah, I'm right on board with all that, without a doubt. Yeah.
Anyway, I'll just go over to Gloria. We've got a record number of people in chat. So please, I'm sorry I have to keep switching off and switching over, but I'm trying to save on bandwidth. I'm terribly sorry. So here we go. Gloria, here you're back again. Again, I have to keep switching back. We'll have to sort this internet out. Would you be happy to come back on another show or several more? Because you really have been a crowd.
I'd be delighted. I just hope my internet.
We'll sort it out. We'll sort this out. We definitely will. There's so much I could read in chat tonight, and I feel so rude by not reading it all out. But hello, I think you've frozen again there, Gloria. Are you still with us? No, I think she's frozen again. Well, what I'll do is she's gone off again. Hello, you're there. You're back again. Sorry, you're frozen there. What I'll do, I think we'll go straight into promoting your books. And I'll just show one of your books here. We've got Gender, Design and Marketing, How Gender Drives Our Perception of Design and Marketing by Gloria, with Professor Gloria Moss, PhD. Have you anything to add to that? So about where you can actually buy it? Oh, you've walked out. Obviously
There's
not.
just a knock on my door. Do you mind if I just answer the door?
Certainly.
I'll be straight back.
Okay, righto. Well, I'll just take that off. Take that off. I'll go over to John. Hello, John. She's got to answer the door. Yeah, I think it's the KGB or no, it's the special branch knocking on the door. I think they've been watching our program.
Yeah, absolutely.
Could give me time to mention the naughty vicar joke, but I better not. Oh, she's back again. Here we go. So I'm just going to flip backwards and forwards.
Bye.
Bye. Hello, Gloria. Oh, you're
Hi
back
there.
again.
Sorry about that. Hi,
that's
hi.
all right. Was it a special branch or MI6 knocking on the door saying they don't like what you're saying? Right, we've got Gender, Design and Marketing, How Gender Drives Our Perception of Design and Marketing by Gloria Moss. And that book, may I ask, where is this available from?
Amazon, I believe, and all the other usual suspects. It's in paperback. Yes, it presents some rather interesting evidence, I think, for the fact that men and women don't necessarily see, and in a literal sense, don't literally see the world in the same way. Not at all. I don't know if that shocks some of your listeners to hear that.
No.
But that's a subject for another day, maybe.
Yes, you would. And we've got another book here, Inclusive Leadership by Gloria Moss. You tell me a very interesting story about how you get to, because one of your subjects is one of my subjects with is psychopaths. That's a subject I'm very interested in. So, because that's our real enemy in the world is psychopaths. Doesn't matter what religion, race, or what. It's the psychopaths who are after us. The ones that harm humans. Some don't harm humans. It's the ones that harm humans. So, would you like to tell us a little bit about this Inclusive Leadership book which I'll pop it on.
Well, yes. I mean, inclusive leadership is a miraculous form of leadership, which we can use when dealing with other people, or even ourselves in our personal lives, in how we interact with friends and family. And it's built on very simple, well, it's a combination of two very well-known models of leadership. And I don't want to bore you with technical jargon, but these two well-known forms of leadership have very interesting titles, and they tell you a lot about the styles. One is called transformational leadership, and the other one is called servant leadership. And that's a wonderful concept, I think, servant leadership, the concept of the leader as the servant of the people that they're working with, not the overlord, which is what we see so often, but the servant of others, the privilege of serving others. And the concept that the book discusses of inclusive leadership rests on some attributes, such as empathy, giving confidence to other people, growing other people, stewardship, looking after society. And I've carried out a number of studies in industry, in universities, in a top independent school. And what we found consistently is that where employees or students or pupils see their leaders as demonstrating these attributes, some of which I've already mentioned, empathy, for example, growing confidence, stewardship, they report themselves to be vastly more productive, vastly more motivated, with greater mental well-being than do people whose leaders do not betray those characteristics. And you mentioned psychopaths. I mean, that they will not be showing empathy in the main and growing other people and so forth. And so really this is best practice leadership. This is what we found from the results, that productivity is off the wall when people have leaders with those attributes. And
Yes.
This isn't a theoretical concept. It's tried and tested. And in the book, I feature 4 organizations that actually practice this form of leadership. And would you believe it? Just by happenstance, they all happen to be British organizations. So we can wave the British flag, not just during the European football, but actually where leadership is concerned. There's some pockets of wonderful practice here in Britain in terms of wonderful leadership. I mean, it's important to talk about leadership because there is so much poor leadership out there. And maybe that will resonate with many people listening. So many surveys demonstrate that, Department of Trade survey, I think it was in 2012, that 85% of people think that their leaders are below par. But there are some shining lights, and we must focus on those shining lights and learn from those. And so the book brings this all together. We have a solution. We have all the tools needed now to put in place the sort of leadership that's not only humane, but also that brings out the best in everybody. And you couldn't really ask for more than that. This isn't happy clappy. This builds brilliant results for businesses, but also leaves people intact and happy, leading happy lives. Poor leadership does neither of those two. Activity. It depresses mental well-being, it depresses motivation, and it leads to unhappy lives. So leaving the negative to one side, we have the solution, and it's a simple one to implement. So again, if anybody's interested in finding out about how to put this nothing short of miraculous form of leadership in place, here's the book. And you can contact me as well if you want, say, a survey done in your organization or advice on how to build this into your private life of others. Giving confidence to people whose confidence is depleted, Listening is another one of the attributes. And what we mean by listening is not just sort of casual listening, but active listening, by which we mean listening and responding to what we're hearing, actually doing something about what we're hearing, not remaining inactive.
This is material for another show, I think.
That give you a sense of what we're talking about?
Yeah, I think this is very good material for another show, another couple of shows. We're going to sort this internet out, because tonight we've been on, this is edge of your seat broadcasting tonight.
Yes. It's far from ideal, isn't it?
It is.
But we're resilient.
Life
delivers a bit of a roller coaster of a ride, doesn't it? So we're kind of used to this, no?
Yeah, I mean, it was a bit like this last week, so I'm used to it. So, first of all, thank you very much, Gloria. And I did say I was going to type out your email.
Yeah, I mean, we just have to remain calm and optimistic and go with the flow.
That's right. And I'm very optimistic about what's going on at the moment with hang on, I better not. This piece of garbage here, this piece of garbage, which is polluting the world. I won't mention the name, William and his toxic arm brew, because there's an old saying, give them enough rope, they hang themselves. And I think as the powers that be seem to be going after the small fish, which is us, they must be very worried. So I think their time is limited, and I'm optimistic. So thank you very much, Professor Gloria Moss PhD, for coming on the show tonight. And also very kindly we've got here John, who's just he's suffering. Don't worry, John, we'll give you a mention. And here we go. We've got Gloria back here now. And thank you very much for joining us this evening. Please join us next week for another show, same time, same place, 8 o'clock on YouTube. I'd like to thank everybody in chat, and I do apologise for not being able to read all your comments out. I do feel very guilty about that.
I'm so sorry. Yeah.
And but we will read them after the programme, don't you worry. And also, I'd like you to all think about people throughout the world like us that don't wear stuff over our face when we go shopping, face nappies and things like that. And there's often a gentleman in the comments box who feels very alone overseas. Another John Richardson. So, spare a thought for these brave people that overseas are Brits, expats that are saying, right, I ain't going to tolerate this, and I'm not going to wear a mouth, shall I say, an obedience muzzle. So, very brave man. And, there's lots of brave people out there that I haven't worn an obedience muzzle. I don't think you have, and I don't think John has either. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. And remember, if it doesn't go down, it should be okay. Where are we? Please tune in. Please go on to fockhamhallradio.com, which is my website. And also with John, if you want to, his website is thefalsificationofhistory.co.uk. And of course, he's got Gmail as well, which is just here. I'm putting on the screen. I'm sorry, Gloria. I was so interested in what you were saying. I didn't have time to type out your email account. I'm terribly sorry. But if we could just give it again, what is it? It's gloria-moss@hotmail.co.uk. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, that is correct. That is correct. So thank you, everybody. And remember, whatever happens, have a laugh and good night.